Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. As always, I'm your host Martin, and I'm happy to have you with me today. For this week's episode, my guest is Clementine Kruczynski, and Clementine has a very different approach to establishing legal entheogenic churches here in the United States. Now, this is a topic that's been featured on the podcast several different times with different lawyers and people who take a very particular legal route to establishing an entheogenic church through the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Clementine has a completely different approach by going through private trusts and common law, and I can't really explain it, so I had a very long conversation with Clementine a couple months ago and going to be sharing that with you today here on the podcast. And she is going to tell you all about it in her own quirky Clementine style. We'll get to that in just a moment, but a few quick announcements before we get to this week's interview. First off, I just want to give a shout out to the next cohort of students with Mindscape Institute who are just starting their trauma-informed 5-MeO DMT facilitation course this week. I'm actually recording this on Sunday morning, and the first class is this afternoon. So I just want to say hello and welcome to all of those new students at Mindscape Institute. And while I'm at it, I'll just go ahead and give another shout out to my students in the 5-MeO DMT Integration Specialist Training course. We are now about 2/3 of the way through the course. Actually, we're exactly 2/3 of the way through the course. So another shout out to those students. I've really been enjoying teaching that class with all of you guys and looking forward to our continued work over the next month here dealing with this topic of how we help people integrate 5-MeO DMT experiences. Let's see. What else have I got? I'm working on a new album. I've got some new music, and I'm going to put one of those new tracks at the end of the interview with Clementine here. And just if anybody's curious and wants to check out these new tracks while they are in the works, you can stop by my Bandcamp page. That's the main place where they are available right now. So that's martinball.bandcamp.com. Over the next week or two, I do hope to wrap up this album. I am 8 songs and 44 minutes in, and probably will bring it up to about 12 songs or something like that. I'm going to release it, or have it set to release on my birthday, November 26th, just for fun. Why not? But anyway, if you want to check out the new tracks, they're over at my Bandcamp page, and hopefully going to be making some more this week. And as usual, I'm really having a good time making music. It's definitely my happy place. Yes, it is. And of course, all of my previous released music, you can find it on Apple Music. You can find it on Spotify. You can find it on YouTube Music. That is just under the name Martin Ball. There's no W on my music. And a reminder that I've got several playlists over at Spotify that are specifically designed for use in psychedelic medicine sessions. So I invite you to check those out. And just a reminder, as always, if you enjoy this podcast and would like to support it, I invite you to stop by my Patreon page at patreon.com/MartinWBall and sign up at a level of support that is right for you. Everything from $1 a month up to $100 a month, with increasing access, bonuses, and gifts all along the way. And a reminder, at anything that is $20 a month and up, you get access to the Entheogenic Evolution Archive, which has hundreds of episodes of the podcast that are no longer publicly available due to limitations in storage space here at Podomatic, which is my host website. But you can catch all of that by signing up at the $20 a month and up levels over at Patreon, and then you can listen to all of this. You can keep yourself busy for hours and hours and hours and hours. Oh my goodness. And of course, I'm always available for 30, 60, or 90-minute integration calls to help you integrate your psychedelic experience from a non-dual and energetic perspective. While I specialize in 5-MeO DMT, I'm not limited to that particular molecule in any way, shape, or form, and I'm happy to talk to you about any psychedelic experiences that you may need some help reflecting on and digesting and integrating into your existence. Okay, that's all I have for now. Let's go ahead and jump into this conversation with Clementine. It is over an hour and a half. Definitely, it's a lengthy interview. You can learn more about Clementine and her work at her website, themindofclementine.com. And that's just all one word, themindofclementine.com. And there will be a link in the podcast notes if you want to go directly to that page. So let's go ahead and get into it. We had this conversation, I think it was back in August now, so I've been holding on to this for a while. My apologies, Clementine, for keeping this so long, but hey, it is out now and available. So please enjoy this very different approach to establishing a legal entheogenic church. You probably haven't heard of this methodology before, so, open up those ears and let's see what Clementine has to say. Enjoy. Oh, I'm excited to welcome on to the Entheogenic Evolution podcast today, Clementine I want to say Kruczynski, but I know that's not right. So correct me.
Kruczynski. You can say K. Clementine K.
Kruczynski. Yeah. Okay. All those consonants shoved together. Don't know what to do with them.
Yeah.
And we are here to talk about The Mind of Clementine, which is your website, which is set up to assist people in the process in establishing entheogenic churches and kind of claiming their religious freedom rights. And we're going to be talking all about that and how you got into that. But as always, we're going to start with where I start with every new guest on the podcast. It is just to invite you to share your story. I'm always interested in what brought people into the world of psychedelics in the first place. Anything personal you'd want to share there, and if you'd rather not, that's fine as well. Mm-hmm. And then we will dive into the legal aspect and what you're offering there. So, but let's start with let's get to know you, Clementine.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. It's such kind of a full circle process for me because I first sort of became aware of you at the WBAC, the World Bufo Congress in 2018. Yeah. I saw you speak and you were just such a character. And I was like, that is definitely like a person living multidimensionally, mythologically. And so I just like kind of saw you. And then this is kind of a full circle moment, maybe 7-8 years later. And I was just starting on the church aspect at that point. So kind of cool to be here now. Thanks for having me. My personal journey, oh my gosh, with psychedelics, I started when I was 15. I'm 36 now. It has been a kind of winding road, as I'm sure it is for everybody. I was grew up small town, just did not make sense to anyone, big person, big fish, and just wanted to know the universe, wanted to understand myself, wanted to understand humanity, society, just was really driven to explore, and got in trouble in a small town, about 8 to 10 brushes with the law by the time I turned 18, just, constant kind of butting up against the ways of this world.
And Clementine, where was that small town?
Conroe, Texas, in North Houston.
Okay, Texas.
Very like East Texas. Yeah. My family there, my dad's side is like 5th generation, like good old Southern boy Texas vibe. Like my family knew all the policemen in the city. Every time I get pulled over, they're like, who's your dad? So definitely felt out of place. And I am just a freak of nature. Like I just really am like very sensitive, I'm very misunderstood. I'm very strange and very sensitive. And just did not make sense there. And so about 15, I started to explore and, started with cannabis. And then, of course, I wanted to try everything. And I really don't have an addictive personality, but I just was really curious, like, what does cocaine feel like? Like, what does even meth feel like? What does ecstasy feel like? Like, I was curious what each one would do and how it would affect me. And, what are they like? What are mushrooms? What's LSD? How does it work? And I was a problem child. But graduated really high honors and I'm really good at school and very like cognitively gifted, is why I'm in this work now. I went to UT, was really gifted at school. It was very easy for me. Socially is where I'm not so good. How the heck do you be a human and be in the world and be talking to people when I'm so tired of talking to people all the time?
Yeah, that's often the case with people who do have high intelligence and also sort of the quirky personalities can be difficult to get along with other people at times. So it's understandable.
Yeah, for autistic people specifically, they call it a canon event to like break off with at least, dozens of friendships over your life, but just from misunderstandings or communication differences, and certainly that was the case for me in high school. Like I was infamous. I still am. Like I just people make up rumors and lies about me that are like blatant lies, and like, and so I'm always trying to figure out like how do I like speak my process without harming others, even though they're
Yeah.
harming me, and smear campaigns and like the whole scapegoating experience, and yeah, been dealing with that all my life, but genuinely like just very misunderstood. And I'm not perfect. I have my challenges, but definitely not like what people say I am. Anyway, aside from that, yeah, just a big person, big spirit, big soul, old soul. And yeah, so I came to Austin. I'm like, gonna go to school, and yeah, continued to explore, continued to, and my journey really changed with psychedelics when I was 24. My ex-boyfriend of 5 years passed in a car accident. So I was telling you before we started recording, my husband died in 2022. So that I had a previous experience with very close death. My boyfriend of 5 years just died in a car accident, and I was 24. I was not with him at the time, about 3 years out, but yeah. So it was 2013. It was like just this kind of sudden, like rude awakening to emotion and grief. And it just rocked my world. Oh my gosh, I have emotion coming up now from it.
Yeah. And
Just,
that's okay. That's okay. That's okay.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
understandable.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with it. But yeah, it was such a loss, and he was such a beautiful soul, and had really been like a stability, like a rock for me. So losing him just rocked my whole world, and I realized through that, like I really didn't have tools to navigate emotion. I had been really asleep, and to that point, be smart and do things logically and take care of business, and I'm really good at all that, but my emotional realm was in disarray, and I didn't know.
Mm.
So he really kind of helped me awaken to my deeper kind of psychic and emotional aspects, which are very powerful. And but yeah, started learning that by myself. Um, so about 8 months after that, I was like struggling so hard, and I just decided to start taking psychedelics, like kind of a lot of them by myself, and meaning like bigger doses. And so I started to take like LSD by myself, and really just journey inward.
Mm.
And that was a big shift for me with the medicines, was like using them more intentionally and for healing,
Yeah.
rather than like recreation or exploring out in the world. And it was more like, wow, like what's my internal reality, and deep psychic reawakening of old worlds. And so that was the big shift for me. And ever since, internal kind of aloneness exploring, it just all developed very rapidly, and my psychic abilities. And with that, great power and great responsibility and challenge, and more scapegoating, and yeah, more trying to figure out how to be a human with others. And I could share more about my journey. At the same time, I was creating an art collective in Austin that just blew up, and suddenly I was a very public figure, and organizing community, and learning about systems of people, which is kind of what I do now, like community building in the churches. And yeah, so I could share a lot more, but that's pretty much how I got into it. And then the more indigenous medicines, I started more like later, like mid 2015s era, 20 teens era, and then really just began a whole other level of course, as we all do with that, like with ayahuasca and things. So yeah, and ever since somehow got here, which I just still attribute to God and me saying yes, of course. But
Yeah. Yeah. Gotta say yes. Um, I'm curious what brought you to WBAC, and even how did you find out about that when that happened?
yeah, so my business partner in the work, Astra, we call her business partner in the work. She's my roommate. Like we've been in this church journey for 8 years. Like all of our lives is intertwined except for romantically. It's a very unique kind of like common law partnership journey, very sacred, very powerful, and very challenging. So she served me toad for the first time in 2017. Oh my God, help me. It was so intense. My nervous system is very sensitive. Well, so my Kundalini awakened at that time, and I didn't know it. And so that toad caused me to have a Kundalini awakening. And because of that, I'm very sensitive to all medicines now. But, of course, once she shared that with me, shared with everybody. I was like, oh my, as Toad tends to do.
Right.
James Oric, when I met him at who has since now passed, of course. When I met him at WBAC, he was like, well, don't go evangelizing, and I'm like, oh, like you,
Right.
and he looked at me like, okay, you're quick. Yeah, rest in peace to him. He was a great soul too. But anyhow, so yeah, I shared with everybody. I was like, this is an incredible pathway of healing, and
Yeah.
and I just flocked people to it because at the time I had come from this kind of public figure role in arts world, and I just shared with everybody I could. I was so amazed, and it was not good for me in the first place. I really struggled to integrate what the Kundalini part of it. I still struggle with that, actually. But yeah, so I had done Toad, and then I was sort of organically working with Astra to serve it. It just sort of happened that way. I'll talk more about our church and how, we got on this path, and if, as a different track. But essentially, so we were about 8 months into our process together in the church building journey. And she was like, hey, somehow she found out about it. And she was like, hey, do you want to go to this? And we just both felt a yes. And so we just kind of ended up there, and beautiful experience. It was really fun, of course. A lot of drama, as you may recall.
Yeah.
Lord have mercy, jeez. But yeah, at the time, we were on the path, and I'm not sure if you were at the Congress at the end, but I took the mic and shared some pretty powerful information into the Congress part of it. But yeah.
Oh. Well, thanks for sharing all that. So let's back up a moment.
Okay.
So we want to get into the church topic, but actually first, let me just make a few comments, if you don't mind, around what you described with your experience with Bufo. And I think this is just kind of a little public service announcement that I want to make out there, is that, of course, working with 5-MeO-DMT in any form, whether it comes from Toad or whether it's the pure molecule, that it really is the most powerful energetic tool that exists out there in reality. There is nothing that comes anywhere even remotely close to it. And what you're describing here is sort of this ongoing Kundalini activation, the enhanced sensitivity to other psychedelics post 5-MeO experience. These are part of the potential repercussions of working with this very powerful medicine. So that if there's anywhere energetically that you are blocked or disconnected or have repression or suppression, it gets in there and it opens it all up. And kind of as you're describing here, that for many people, it's one of these, there's no going back sort of phenomenon, that once you introduce that level of energy, that it can potentially permanently change you. And
absolutely it will. I would say not just can, it absolutely will.
Yeah. This ongoing energetic process then can definitely be challenging for people. And it's not like, well, I'm going to do this weekend and then I'm going to go back to my life. That you might not be going back to your life. So it's one of these things that I always like to educate people around, that it's very important to understand that going in. And then also it's kind of funny with the Orok, telling you not to be an evangelist, because obviously he was an evangelist for 5-MeO. I mean, he wrote right there in his book, like, this is the only true entheogen that exists. Like, this is the only one. And in a sense, I think he's very right. But that's also a common phenomenon, that once those of us who experience that power of 5-MeO-DMT tend to be amazed and astounded by it. And there's usually a very, very strong desire to share the experience, to share information about it. And so people do become evangelical because it's life-changing, it's world-changing, it's phenomenal. So just wanted to comment on that for the listening public.
Much respect and gratitude for pointing that out, and for people to take this seriously. It absolutely is serious in every way. After that first experience, about 7 days, I paced my apartment. I did not ground. I could not eat. All I could do was write about what happened to me. It was utterly beyond this world in every way, and taking it seriously is utterly critical advice. Side note, my sister went through a psychosis in 2013 around the same time I was dealing with my ex-boyfriend's passing. And utterly what is possible with this medicine in particular is not to be trifled with. It absolutely can unground every aspect of your life. And yeah, much respect for really hammering that point home. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for being responsible in that aspect. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that you were able to make it to that event. I felt that that was a very historic event in Mexico City, and props to Mario and Rack and Ethereal and Sandra, all the folks who put that on. That I think it was phenomenal. That was really the first
Yeah.
time in history that so many people involved with 5-MeO, DMT, and Toad had been brought together into one place. And so that was very historic in that sense. And yeah,
Really
there was some drama, there was some action there, and a lot of us working in the 5-MeO field, we are characters. There's no doubt about that.
Absolutely. Said with yeah, respect and admiration, of course, because it takes a lot to become the full character that you are in this world when so many would attack you for it. So, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, thank you for saying so. So let's back up a moment. Let's talk about church. Let's talk about religion. Did you grow up in a religion or within a church? What was your orientation there, just from your family background?
Yeah, so I was Baptist realm and kind of like definitely more strict in the church when I was younger, like early childhood to maybe middle school era. I was very much like we were often at the church. And then through my teenage years, we had kind of gotten away from it. My mom divorced my dad because of abuse challenges and which I much respect her for doing the harder thing. And so through that process, she became, a lot more stressed. And so we weren't going to church as much. And so, yeah, Baptist and definitely like, I wouldn't say Southern Baptist in the way of like that kind of branch, but definitely Baptist in the South, you know? Um, like all the secret judging of like, oh, you're smoking pot, but then they like take pain pills and like drink wine all night, and stuff like that. So just like the secret like hypocrisy and yeah, everything they're judging you for, they're also doing. And, yeah.
Yeah. So the surface projection versus the backside of what's actually taking place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that probably didn't sit too well with you, I'd imagine.
I was just their scapegoat, and I was just a mirror and a scapegoat. And of course, I didn't really know how to communicate, and I didn't know, all the things that go along with autism. I think people just, I didn't know I was autistic until I was 33, right around when my husband was passing. But in hindsight, it's like that's probably why, yeah, a lot of that was happening for me. But yeah, definitely not making sense in those systems, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I think you said it was around 2017 where you and your partner started to form this church. So it's kind of mid trajectory a little bit. So just to add a little history for the listening audience, that it was back in the mid 1990s when the Native American Religious Freedom Restoration Act officially recognized the Native American Church and its right to use peyote. And then in the early 2000s, we had a couple cases with ayahuasca. There was the Santo Daime Church here in Ashland, Oregon, the Church of the Holy Light of the Queen, which I was attending at the time in 2009, and they took the federal government to court for the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or Religious Freedom Protections. And then we also had the União do Vegetal, also another Brazilian syncretic religion with ayahuasca. Also got recognized that they had their ayahuasca confiscated at the border, and they sued the government and they got it back. And now, thanks to the likes of people like yourself, that there's kind of a mushrooming experience of people wanting to establish entheogenic churches. So, and now here we are, 2025. So 2017, that's a little bit in the middle of sort of this range. So I'm curious, like, how did that come about, in the idea of, rather than just functioning as a quote underground facilitator, the idea of actually making a church and providing a church service. And so this was with Toad?
Yes.
Yeah. Which I think really naturally lends itself to a ceremonial or religious context in the sense
Oh,
that, like,
absolutely.
oh my God, it's God. It's like this is the divine experience. So I think that's very natural. But I'm curious of what you can share with us about what was the thought process there? How did that come about?
Well, I've always been a person that is going to follow God when it does not make sense, no matter if it makes sense. And what is told to me to do, I will do. Even if I look crazy and horrible to everybody, I will do it. Um, and that's just how I've always lived my life. Like I've never had a real job. I've done all kinds of different projects and creations and businesses and been an entrepreneur since I was 20 and just really like following the path, step by step by step. And so when Astra kind of brought this, she had been initiated by a Mexican healer and was just starting the journey, but they didn't really give her any kind of like ceremonial grounding. Like the first thing so my first toad, I screamed and screamed and screamed and screamed and screamed and
Yeah.
screamed. I'm like in a neighborhood with like neighbors.
Yeah.
I'm like in this like experience of like it was almost like a live like a YouTube or Facebook live where like everybody was aware of me and I was aware of them being aware of me and like I was just continuing to
Right.
it was very like my whole thing is like voicing who I am and come what may and witch wound and that kind of thing. So it was like whoa. And essentially regarding the process, sorry, I lost my train of thought, kind of getting lost in that journey.
Yeah. So formation of the
Oh.
church. Yeah.
So basically the first thing I said when I came out of it was, holy shit, this needs a ceremony. Like, whoa, this needs an altar. Like what you don't need to be driving to people's houses and doing this like all, willy like, and she would play music and it was very beautiful, but it was like kind of like the indigenous way, like, hey, hold your intention in your heart and smoke this, and like, I'm like, had been doing a lot of like ritual work for a long time, including for groups and anyway, so I'm like, no, this is going to have some prayer around it. So I kind of brought that aspect, like the ceremony structure and sort of orienting people, like, because once I didn't really get any orientation, I'm like, hey, smoke this,
Yeah.
Didn't even know anything about it. She was like coming over to hang out and she's like, hey, so I have this medicine. Do you want to try it? And my body just said yes. So I'm like, okay. I did not even know what it was when I smoked it. So then the second I'm like, oh, hell no, this is going to everybody's going to be oriented. There's going to be safeties. Like, I just immediately like, we're grounding this. Like, this is not going to be done this way. So we kind of just sort of organically started serving it because I was bringing people to the medicine and I was providing the space, which was very beautiful in East Austin. And long story short, it was just kind of organic that we just started working together. So we were doing that for a while. And then we're like, all right, we're taking these singing bowls everywhere and we're going to all these different people's houses and we need like, let's consolidate. We'll make a retreat. So this is like in early 2018 time. And we had already been like refining the rituals and kind of trying to, and by the way, the art collective I had built in 2013, which again, like was very prominent. Like I was on the cover of the Austin Chronicle and on winning like an Austin Music Award and like a lot of work for like recognition publicly. I had been community building. I had been doing large events and I had been continuing at that time to create like quarterly gatherings. And so I was already in this aspect of like community building and creating like a hearth, I call it, like creating a family hearth where we all come together. And community is very important in an aspect of the church. And so that's always, been a big part of my journey, figuring out that social, like, I'm like, okay, we weirdos, like if the weirdos of every community get together, then we'll get along. My challenge has been kind of underestimating my own weirdness and kind of like being with the wrong, like kind of people that are like way more normal than me, but they think they're weird. And I think they're weird until and then, yeah, they turn against me because I don't know. I don't understand it fully. Still working through the scapegoat thing. But long story short, back to the church process. So we had been, I had been inviting Astra to the gatherings and just building community. So that was already kind of a track. And so we just kind of naturally like brought the people we were serving the medicine to in the fold. And about, it was like 6, 7, 8 months after we had started together, I was like, well, let's do a retreat. We'll consolidate everybody and just do it in a weekend instead of, going all over the place. So we rented a place and we signed up 24 people in a weekend in 3 days. It was a big journey that happened, And so leading up to that retreat, I'm like, well, we're going to put in place I love okay, so since then I have been gathering data. I made a survey and I have been gathering data before and after every single person we have served, which is about 1,000 people at this point. So I have data on their mood and how it changed their view of God before and after. And that's just kind of side note. I have to do something with that at some point. But
absolutely. I mean, that's the kind of thing I want to see. I want to see that every time.
And short aspect, important aspect. Now, when I teach this, that's an important aspect of safety. So it's if you're giving surveys before and after, and, that's an important aspect of establishing safety, which is, obviously what the federal government supposedly cares about, right? So if you have surveys, so that's something I teach in my work is that's one tiny aspect of a large educational system. But having surveys really helps you give concrete data for safety should you be challenged, Side note, little tidbit for your people. But yeah, the survey is really cool. So I set in place the survey. I made the disclaimer, and I made a medical intake. So I would have analog copies of the safety side. And so as I'm sitting there writing the disclaimer, I remember we were at a coffee shop, Bennu in East Austin, just this rundown little indie coffee shop, and I'm like, hey, Astra, what are we calling ourselves? What are we? Who are people not liable to? What's the system here? And she's like, good question. So so we were we'll think about it. So she, continues what she's doing. I continue what I'm doing. And, so I start working on the disclaimer. I'm just, we're mulling on it. And about a few minutes later, she looks at me over the MacBook. I remember this photographically. She looks at me over the MacBook and she's like, Clem, I think we're supposed to start a church. And this is at a time, as you said, the Native Americans, which, grateful, grateful for the groundwork, honoring all the people that went up against the system to put this in place, with much reverence and gratitude and respect for the precedent. In Austin, there were not churches. And there really weren't churches like this above ground, doing this in the way, non-natively, above ground churches. That was not a thing. That wasn't even a thing at WBAC. It was just not a thing. And we were just given this idea. So, presumably Austra's researching and, makes this connection. I don't even know how. So then we close the MacBooks. I remember when she said that, I have goosebumps even now. It was a duffel bag of money, meaning the thud was just boom. It just felt like this thud on the table. I remember the dust specks in the golden light around her. It was this moment. And we go home, we meditate and ask what is the guidance here? What does the medicine want? What do we, which is what I teach now is you have questions about your church, go to the medicine, go to God. I am not your source, right? Commune, I call it communion, commune with your church, commune with the soul of your church, because it will speak to you. And it did. So we meditate in separate rooms. We come together. We both had the idea of working with the womb. So our church is called Temple of the Sacred Womb, but not in the aspect necessarily of the feminine womb. It's the aspect, it can be. We've done a lot of womb healings, allowing people to have children and things like that in sessions. But it's also creating an energetic womb for people to rebirth in. Yeah. And it's not about us. We are space holders. It is about their god, goddess, and their soul rebirthing. And that's how, and so we are a very feminine way of doing it. We are a very yin, we call it the yin approach, where we are letting their space, we're letting them emerge. We're not this Octavio Rettig, push, insert, impose. We are lay back, let their own spirit emerge, and we are there to support and protect if need be. We call it the yin approach. But so that's the womb for us, is creating this energetic structure and safety and energy that they feel safe in. So we both downloaded that word, and we both thought it was supposed to be called temple. And this was independently brought to us. So we're tinkering and we're this is a cool story. So I'm just going to share the name. Yeah. So we're okay, Temple of the Sacred Womb. That's what we land on. This is 2018 at this point. And so we look, and I had built all these artist brands for the art collective, a lot of musicians and stuff. So I'm like, let's look it up. And the other thing we had downloaded is that there was supposed to be a council of 13 decision makers at some point eventually. So we're like, okay, so we look it up. And there is not only a Temple of the Sacred Womb in Colorado, but they on their about page had Council of 13. I kid you not. It was the exact same terminology. And we're like, what is this? It was profound. And so we called it Church of the Sacred Womb to begin. After my husband passed, he wanted the name to be Temple. And so we found out her website was defunct. We reached out to her. She gave us all the names, and she was this elder, and she was like, oh my gosh, y'all are going to release me. I've been praying what to do with this. Like, it fell apart, and I want to pass the baton on. And so it was a very organic, like mystical process for our name. But so that's how it happened. And from there, we just started, building the religious practices. And that's like, it's taken many forms over the years. We've provided, bi-monthly moon rituals, one monthly sun ritual for about a year and a half straight. We did that. Weekly men and women circles. We've done integration circles once a month. We've done yearly like ceremonies celebrating death and birth, and a lot of different creational impulses and co-creation in the community. And a lot of different forms and monthly ecstatic dance and just a lot of religious aspects and religious worship forms, let's say. But and then I could share more about the philosophy and everything, but I kind of want to
so that gives us a good idea of sort of the history there and what inspired it. Thank you for sharing all of that. That's a big part of the modern Entheogenic church movement is the development of what is the central philosophy, what are the central doctrines, what are the teachings, and what I really want to ask about, and maybe this is the time, maybe this isn't the time, but I'm curious, like when did you start focusing on the legal aspect of it? Because that of course is a big part of, like, if you do want to present your church to the government, you need to have some kind of statement of belief or central philosophy or central 100%. Teaching. So what came first? I mean, were you guys, it sounds like you were developing this very organically, not necessarily, and just correct me if I'm wrong, not necessarily going off of the checklist of like, oh, we've got to have these things in order to be recognized as a church, but maybe just more organically, like this is what we feel we are inspired to create. So how was that? Yeah. And then, yes, what is that central philosophy?
Yeah, that's a great other track, because I totally, that aspect came later. And, but, I'm very diligent in the way that I am, and I cross my T's and I dot my I's. I take care of business. I'm very grounded in that way. And so the legal side, so we were working with an attorney that now works in the entheogenic space. I don't want to name names, but he completely misled us in my mind. That's my feeling and conclusion, but I guess later so it was all about 501c3. Here's how you start. Here's what you do. Here's how it goes. And so I start the process. So, the second we're kind of like, let's make a church, aside from the retreat and the kind of organic aspects, I was like, I just started researching it and, doing that path, of course, because what else are you going to do? You're going to make a church the way you think you're supposed to. So I researched that and sort of start working on the paperwork. I tried to figure out various aspects like bank account, whatever. And for about 3 years, I'm working on this paperwork. And I kid you not, every single little thing about it would not flow. Like, I remember I would set up a board and we'd be like, all right, we're the board, we're going to do this. And at the time the church was growing, around 2020, 2021, the church kind of reached its peak, which I regret tremendously. We are not for everybody. We are very to use your word for it, non-dual, very shadow work, the real, get into the dark shit, get into the real shit, but also pleasure, joy, dancing bare feet on the earth, very tribal nature, show up when it's hard, real mutual aid kind of community.
Yeah.
And it just attracted all of these ungrounded, it attracted the gamut, but what I regret most is that it grew so fast and attracted a lot of these like love and lighters, we call them, and people that just do not have capacity for conflict. They do not have capacity for like real conversations. There's a lot of shadowy stuff like jealousies and then of course the neurodivergence aspect. And I've been called a narcissist more times than I can count, like, by people publicly. Just all this like aspects of like they're not willing to have conversations and like really explore in a tribal sense, you know. But yeah, sorry, backing up, that's just my personal part of it. But so the legal side, so every single time, like that's an example of like I would get a board in place, like something would shift. And then I'm like, oh, starting again. Or there was just all these ways that the path kept being blocked.
Yeah.
And so, and I was diligent. Like I am not, I've been doing this since, you know, about what, 7, 8 years now. I'm like, and we should have quit many times in terms of what happened to us, but I just kept going. And, so at one point, I think about three and a half years in, you know, we're going through COVID. I'm like trying to get my husband a green card. He was from Brazil. I'm like trying to build his business. He's a massage therapist at the time. And like, I'm trying to do a lot of things. And I was very ungrounded at the time. I didn't know I was autistic yet. So, you know, a lot of my like negative traits were really at the fore because I just did not understand my nervous system yet. And so I was like, just, it all kind of like came to a head. And I'm like, God, like I'm on my knees in the living room, like at the altar. I'm like, what do you want from me? Like, I am doing what you told me to do. Like, show me the way. Like, you want me to make a church and I'm trying to do that. Like, what do you want from me? Like, show me the path, right? And I'm just like at my wit's end with it. About 2 weeks later, I'm at the gym. And I'm listening to like a YouTube playlist about, at the time I was kind of starting to explore like private law and understanding the private domain and contract law and just from a personal aspect of like changing your status and that kind of thing. And I came across this former judge and his name's David Edwards. And he was just talking about this other kind of church. And I was like, what? Like what? And again, like this is a time like churches were not a thing. Like it was just so like ordained. I left the gym. I go home. I'm like in awe. It was like one of those moments I'm like, God is showing me, you know? And so it lit a fire. I start researching everything I can about this private church and that it's historically been the type of church until 1954 is when the 501c3 was invented. Okay. And, you know, the big changes to the tax code were adopted and everything, forming the 501 section. And I'm like, there's been a whole other type of church based on contracts and collective ethos and agreements this whole time. And like, it was just so obvious to me. It was that was the answer. I studied, I was like on wildfire. At the same time, though, I was like juggling a profound amount of responsibility, like to the point that it led to me having a meltdown, which caused me to learn I was autistic, and my husband was manipulated against me and the whole thing, and culminating his death later, 2022. But circumstantially, it was just insane. But I was like autistically like special interested. Like I'm about to learn everything. I bought everything I could find on it. I was taking their courses. I was so in awe that this existed. And so then, you know, everything kind of happened. Well, I set up our church, the private church, through that realm, which we can talk about what it is and how it works. Historically, it's called an unincorporated voluntary association, private unincorporated church. Again, this has historically been the norm until more recently when the 501c3 and then the Johnson Amendment was passed, kind of calling for churches to be legitimized. Oh, we got to go to the government and be a corporation. We got to, you know, voluntarily waive our rights to separation of churches. Hey, we have to be a corporation first. We have to be legitimate. When it was never under the government's jurisdiction. It was by definition separate. It was by definition your community leaders in your like local networks, like in the mycelial network of humanity. It was tribal. We never had churches go to a government and say, can I please be a church, sir? Please give me a stamp. Can I be under your jurisdiction, please? Can I please submit all of my rights to your control? that can be revoked at any time. That was never how it was, okay? And our people fought really hard so that that wouldn't be how it was. And then all this propaganda in 1954 and all of it came out to convince us that you can only be a legitimate church if you file as a corporation, and then you file as a church, public charity technically under the section. And then you can't even still do your psychedelics without going through the controlled, DEA. You have to get approval. Very few people are ever given approval. So it's a big sham, in my opinion. Anyway, so backing up, I set ours in place, and I was amazed. I was like, God showed me. I asked and God showed me, and this is the path. And then a little while later, he started offering courses for people to learn how to do it. I was like, overnight. I took the course overnight. It stayed up all like 24 hours. I was so in awe of this information. And I'm just naturally very gifted, like autistically, with this kind of information. Like I have really insane retention but yeah. And so, and then simultaneously, like I'm doing retreats with different, indigenous communities and setting up these, journey processes for people. And I'm very good at, like Oster and I are very good at retreats. Like we're just really good at people holding. Not always. I have people that would say completely otherwise, which honoring, yes, not perfect, but essentially, they would ask me like, can you set up yours? Can you set up mine? I'd be like, yeah, let me turn you on to this cool stuff. And so yeah, just kind of organically happened that way too. And I also so here we are now. I was doing it one-on-one for a while, and then I sort of started launching more group programs to make it more efficient and to offer like more robust education. I freaking love it. I literally like could cry. I love it so much. I feel like God just used my life and used my gifts to be of service in this gap. And yeah, I feel in awe about it every day. And then right now I'm working on, we could talk. Yeah, I want to back up. I know you probably have a ton of questions, but so that's where I am now. I'm also working with private trusts to support with like liability protection and everything. So, which I'm working on now. But yeah, I know. So that's a lot.
Yeah.
All at once. So
yeah. Thanks for sharing, Clementine. So yeah, I definitely want to dig into this a little bit more because I've never heard of this distinction before that you're discussing here between a 501c3 church and then this other format of church. And so just going back to that initial podcast, was that about establishing a psychedelic church, or was that just here's an alternative means of how to establish a church without going the 501c3 route? And then if this is another option, what is the advantages of going to 501c3? Is it just the tax exempt status, or this is just, it's like many areas of law in the United States, this is confusing and convoluted, and that it's very difficult to access the law in many ways, I think, in United States culture, because it's very labyrinthian, it's very complex, and there's all these little ins and outs. And so, yeah, this is a distinction I've never heard of. So let's talk a little bit more about that and how it could be applied then to an entheogenic church that's different from this 501c3 route. And yeah, even that question of, well, if this is an alternate route, why would anyone do the 501c3? So
yeah, well, I will say there's pros and cons to both, and there is no one size fits all for everybody. And my whole point to this, just as an overview, and then I'll kind of dig into your questions, a little more tracks there to follow, but is that in order to have permission, which I just cringe saying, in order to have permission to serve psychedelics or engage in psychedelics from our overlords, you have to file as a corporation in your state or in some state, apply for the 501c3 status on top of that corporation, and then you have to then still don't have permission. You've climbed this intense mountain, given up a ton of privacy information, disclosed a lot of things about your church, your worship, your relationship with God, your forms of worship and your community. And you've applied for permission to do what you should naturally already be getting to do by God's will. And then you have to get a Controlled Substances Act exemption, which like a fraction of people are ever going to be awarded. And even then you have to go through this epic court case battle to get it, usually.
Yeah.
In my opinion, that is not right. And, especially in light of, like, this is what I teach, like, is like humans have been using psychedelics for millions of years. Okay. Tribally, we are earth and we are wind and we are water and we are, right? We are human beings before God created, I call it by God, for God. And the American government is 248 years old. Or 249. Like, what in the heck? Like, they have control over my worship forms that my ancestors have been using all over the world for millions of years, and they think like they're like a peon. And so contextualizing this stuff in my mind is very important, right?
Yeah.
Now, the difference in, like, you're talking about the benefits, and so yes, no one's heard of it, just like no one's heard of the private domain. And I will sit here and all day every day talk about the Supreme Court has called the private domain a shield, a shelter for constitutional protection. It has called it domain set apart for free assembly. It is established right. Okay? Now, the way the Constitution works and the governments work and the courts work is that, well, let's say the federal or the governments. The Constitution has what's called enumerated powers. Meaning the federal government, okay, so let me start with the states. The Constitution gives the federal government, Constitution's written by the states, right? And the states are giving the federal government the rights, and they're enumerated. And what that means is they only have the rights that are given in the Constitution, and everything else is reserved by the states. Now, the states only have power that are enumerated by the state constitutions. And who reserves the power from that? The people. So what we do not give to the government explicitly, written out in a bullet point form, is not a power of the government. That's called reserved powers. Now, what does that entail? We're talking, and this stuff is so cool. Oh my God, it's so cool. So when you really start digging in, okay, we have the right to contract. And I'll just start there, because right to contract, and this is why it's really cool, is because it transcends law. Then you go into like a spiritual realm. Souls have sovereign right to contract, right? We have the right to choose our destiny, right? Presumably. In my mind, that's the only thing that makes sense in this game. But so you have, let me just start and focus on the right to contract. So we have the universal and constitutionally protected right. Article 1, Section 10 says, no state shall make any law that impairs the obligation of a contract. What that means is that no government can interpret a private contract or impose a law that impairs the obligations of contract. So if I have a contract with you, let's say we do business together, you and I have a contract, and I set the contract rate at $5,000. Okay, you're going to pay me $5,000 to do something. The government has no jurisdiction to come in and regulate that private contract for any reason unless you or I ask for that to occur. Okay? That is a highly protected right. And why? Because the Constitution itself is a contract. Everything is a contract. Your voluntary consent to pay taxes is a contract. Everything boils down. And that's why law is so interesting, because it actually does boil down to contract law underneath everything. And what's more interesting, even beneath that, is natural law. Now, oh my God, when I was really downloading on natural law, I was in awe, okay? Because, and I feel emotional about it, natural law is the unifying factor underneath everything that exists in the universe, okay? Now, what's interesting, so natural law, to define it very shortly, and I'm also I want a side note, I am autistic, I can easily flood people, so kind of interrupt me if I need to clarify, but I can easily like info dump, they call it, right? But so natural law is a critical element of everything, because natural law, easy way to define it, is like if you took all governments across all time and space and put it in a big boiling pot and you took out anything that was unique to that culture or time, what would remain, right? What would remain? And there are these universal principles like thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not do harm, thou shalt honor property, thou shalt honor agreements, right? These kind of universal moral standards that everybody inherently knows is right and wrong. Like, we know killing is wrong. Nobody's going to kill and say that's a justified offense. You know? So it's like natural law necessarily constitutes, induces, creates natural rights. These are the universal human rights. So based on natural law, we have natural rights. This is like dignity, self-defense, natural right, natural human rights. So what's interesting about natural law is for thousands of years, it has been the basis of legal systems throughout the whole world, whether primitive, to use an outdated term, or modern, even to this day. So flashing forward through like a lot of like city-state politics, Rome, figuring stuff out, moving to England. England developed a system based on natural law, where their judges were beholden to creating systems and rulings based on natural law. So they had to justify everything they ruled based on the principles of natural law, which had been back to like Aristotle defined and philosophized on at infinitum. And so you have England developing a system where judges are developing a common law system. Common law is judge-made law. So judges making rulings that then become law. That's called a common law system. So you have judges interpreting cases, making philosophical arguments based on natural law, universal principles. Now, what's important about that is America inherited. Our entire legal system is based on England's system and some other important influences like, James Madison and Lycia, and like kind of these ancient city-state tribal ways that they had been figuring out tribal governments for forever, that these founding fathers were studying, because they were like, how do we create the epic, perfect democracy or / republic? How do we do that? Anyway, so our system is based on natural law. That's what people don't know. Now, the problem with that is that over the last 100 years, due to industrialization and them wanting to create uniformity and statutes and codes, it's become very procedural based. So a lot of the system has gotten away from, is it morally right and wrong based on universal principles of truth and right and wrong moral standards? Or is it because you didn't file this motion, right? Or because you did this and you didn't do that, and you blah, blah, blah court procedure and blah, blah, blah statute and our, fake stuff. Okay, so we've had like kind of a movement of our legal system away from natural law. However, that said, you can still argue natural law because it is the foundation of our principle. So this is where these private churches come in.
Okay, so let me interrupt for just a second. So I think maybe something that people could relate to at this level is this a phrase that maybe people have heard, the idea of like a common law marriage, where couples have been living together for a certain amount of time and that they can be legally recognized as being married, even though, as you say, they haven't done the paperwork. They didn't go and fill out forms. They didn't, go to church. They didn't go to the judge. But because they've been living together for a certain amount of time, there's like, no, you are a common law married couple. So is that within this paradigm between natural law and the more bureaucratic form of law that you're discussing?
Yeah, this is essentially the substance over form doctrine, which is like where the courts will look at what's actually happening like in real time, as opposed to like what it's labeled as. So like if you've lived, so the substance over the actual like form, and slight distinction in your phrasing, like legally, pertains to like the system. It's a commercial term or slash a public domain term. So we have public domain, private domain. Private domain is contract law, individual rights, sovereignty, natural law, and then we have the public commercial realm, which is statutes, and they're all of the executive agencies and all of Congress and all of government is under public domain, and it's ultimately just jurisdictions. Okay, and these have been established by the Supreme Court. This is not hoo-ha. So essentially, I lost my train of thought, but what was your question pertaining to again?
Yeah, so around the idea of common law marriage, for example.
Yeah, so essentially you're common law married because you've been living together, and for all intents and purposes, in substance, you've been, you're married, in substance, but legally you're not married. Lawfully, according to common law interpretation, you are married. But legally you're not married because that would take you getting a license and going to the state and saying, "Can I please be married, sir and madam? Yeah. Can I please include you as a party in my marriage contract?" Third party, which is why you can have control over my divorce, because I'm willfully including you as a party in my marriage contract.
Right. Okay. So then, now returning to the distinction between these different forms of churches and church organizations and the public law versus private law, the common law domain versus the legalistic law domain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So unincorporated churches were the norm. And, we have a ton of cases. One of them I can think of offhand is Watson versus Jones. It was like in the 1870s, I believe. And, we have a ton of court cases where the court's like, why is this in the church? Why is this in the public courts? Because it's a church and churches rule over it. So churches historically had ecclesiastical governments. They had their own government. They had their own conflict system. They had their own tribal ways, right? Because they were historically private, like tribal communities that didn't go to the state. The state was, by definition, not able to be involved. So you have these cases where there would be a, dispute within the churches, and they would go to the courts, and the courts literally throws out the cases because they're like, why is this even in the public courts? This is a private jurisdiction, ecclesiastical matter, case closed, where you had the clear separation and you had the clear, this is an internal church government issue, sir. Take it up with your own people, And there's a lot of cases like that. And it's because churches were self-contained. They were their own ecosystems. And this is what I'm really about. I'm not just about setting up an entheogenic church. That is a major part of what I do, but it is only one step. What I'm really here to do using these principles is to support community leaders in establishing tribal ethos and collective agreements and these kind of organic, they're like nodes in the mycelial network. Because think about it, if our system collapses, which seems every day we're on the verge of, Lord have mercy on the soul. If that happens, what is our recourse? Hopefully, strong local community networks with empowered leaders that know their rights, that are managing their assets well and effectively through private trusts, which can outlive them. And strong ethos, like you're saying, the philosophies of the churches, knowing the practices of the church, having, let's kind of say congealed, consolidated community minds, who people feel stewards over, and legacies that can last generations, where children can grow up in it and inherit it. The tribal network of humanity is our only hope. It really is. And doing this process with my work really does establish an energetic foundation for people's offerings. And I could go a million different directions here. I want to check in. But that's ultimately what it is we're getting people back to the ways that our great-grandfathers and great-grandmothers knew this stuff. Even our grandparents, depending on your generation, knew their rights way infinitely more. I'm learning stuff that my great-grandparents knew like the back of their hand when I'm researching this stuff. It's about reclaiming our sovereign right to worship, keeping the government out of our relationship between us and God. Sorry, sir, but my worship is between me and God and my community. Thank you very much. Right? And it's about empowering people to rethink that. Like, part of my work, a big part of it is helping reprogram people. Like, they don't need to ask me permission. They don't need to ask daddy government for permission. They need to ask God. They need to ask the medicine. What is the way, right? Within reason. That's where we have like community accountability. And, a big part of what I do too is like helping people establish internal conflict management systems. We need to learn how to be in conflict together. We need to learn how to have hard conversations together. We need to learn how to give people the benefit of the doubt. We need to learn how to be curious instead of accusatory toward people. We need to be able to disagree with people. These are tribal ethos. Mm. And all of this is kind of wrapped up in the work I do, because it's not just about establishing an entheogenic church. It is about learning your rights. It is about establishing a foundation for your practice and your offerings, and knowing the law, so you know how to stay in the bounds and not get in trouble or not invite trouble, let's say. But it's larger than that. It's about reestablishing tribal minds and, hopefully putting in place like a tribal network for people that, your local people can be empowered and know these, because there's been revolutions as old as time, and people need to know their rights, especially in uncertain times. So did that answer your question or?
Yeah, we're getting at it. We're getting at it. There's just a lot of interesting details here. So, what we're eventually moving towards is the question of, so how does this protect the use of psychedelic sacraments? But before we get to that, that's just my pointer. That's the sign of like where we're going. What does this then involve? And again, maybe we can contrast it with the 501c3 route of like, here's the specific paperwork you've got to do. Here's a checklist of things you need to do. Establish a corporation. You get your board. What is this other process? And we can even talk about it just outside the realm of psychedelics. But then eventually we want to specifically get to, how does this offer a legal protection for somebody who wants to establish a psychedelic church or an entheogenic church?
Great. This is good structure. Thank you for providing that. Because there's so many trails you can go in, it's like, oh, it's so cool. So, okay. So let's talk really briefly. So when I talk to people like attorneys, and I talk to people that, have their, it's really academics and lawyers and / people in the public domain. They're all educated in public domain law. Very few of them, in fact, most of them don't know anything about private law. They're not educated in this realm. So I'll give you an example. Like I have an attorney I work with in California she's like important. She's been litigating 25 years and she's won like some major like COVID vaccine religious rights cases, and you should probably interview her too. She her dad was like the production manager for Grateful Dead, like the production manager. And like, yeah, she's just like very interesting as a person in general, but she's won some major like milestone cases for religious rights. And so she, went through this whole process. I met her in California by a whim. And now we're kind of working together on a system that, like, once people go through this process, they can have attorney support, because you can't find attorneys educated in this stuff, okay? So this is kind of like the disclaimer before I talk about this stuff. So when I talk to people about this, if they are attorneys or they have all this stuff invested in the public domain, they're super, they're supposedly the authority. They're, they're educated and they've been taught what it is, but they're not taught anything about the private domain. That is complete. You don't use lawyers in the private domain. Why? Because attorneys are officers of the court. They are by definition public agents. Okay. You do not use attorneys unless you're in a court of law. And if you're in a court of law, you're already in the public domain jurisdiction. Okay. So when I talk to people about this, they have all these reasons why it's not legitimate. But then I have this attorney, and I know the truth that this attorney, she's like, yeah, man, I had a 25-year career in the courts, and everybody knows it's corrupt, and everybody knows it's collapsing because it's not, people are losing faith in it. And she's like, I was always wondering, like, what's the new, like, how do we, amend it? And she's like, the public domain is the key. And it is the key because it's the old way. It's the old real way. And so she's like, she said that at first, as an attorney, she scoffed at it. And she's like, no way, there's no way none of that's real. But then when she started digging into it, and that's what I challenge everybody who has issues with this, look into the laws, read the court cases, read it, read the IRS tax code. Like, it all is black and white. You can back it up, right? The problem is that we do not have case law around private church, medicine church, and what is it? There's 3 elements: private, medicine church, and there's another one. We don't have case law about the very specific intersection, but we should, in my opinion, soon. But okay, so backing up a little, the issue everybody wants to say is the reason it doesn't. Okay, wait, I'm sorry. I'm going into like this, your second question first. So the process itself is simple, but the key is education. So because you are not being given permission by the government, right? You don't have this stamp. Of course, most people don't have the stamp. So most proponents of the 501c3 path are like that it's the only legitimate way. It's the only way to truly be 100% safe. But my whole thing is, so you're telling people to set up a 501c3, give up their rights, get in the jurisdiction of the government, volunteer to get in their jurisdiction, giving them the right over you to judge your process and revoke it. And then they still won't even have permission to serve entheogenics, okay, until they get the CSA exemption. That's the problem with that route. So, but, bless them, they think that's the only legitimate path. Well, this other route...
Yes, so if I could just interrupt for a moment. So it's kind of like, if you go that route, you can set up everything that you need to create a church, and you can have that church, and that church exists, but the likelihood of the government actually giving you permission as an exemption, this is to be under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, for the exemption around drug laws to serve a psychedelic sacrament within your church, that's where the likelihood of them actually granting that is minuscule. Yep. Therefore, you have a legitimate church. It is here. It exists. You just you don't legally still have the right to consume your sacrament within the church.
You are still at risk. You still could get that knock at the door. You still have no rights.
Yeah.
So my whole argument is, all right, so this as an alternative path, I mean, you have probably at least 1 million people serving psychedelics in this country at this point. Probably. I don't know. Not good with demographics. But think about how many people are serving psychedelics now. It's a Joe Schmo on the street every day picking up the mantle. God bless him, because it's a hard-ass mantle. Oh, my God, help me. Okay, so... So you have how many people flocking to serve psychedelics with no protection, even if they get a 501c3? Okay, so my whole argument is it not better for them to set up a private church? And I'll tell you what that entails in a second. Learn everything, because I have an amazing educational system. I'm so freaking proud of it. I am like amazed at what comes through me, synthesizing this information, like including of my teachers. You have a private church set up. You have education, knowing your rights, how to stay in the private domain, how to stay out of their jurisdiction. You learn what it takes to, safeties. You learn what it takes to have the philosophy, have the doctrine, have the basics, right? You even get a bank account. You even potentially get an LLC to manage your church if you want. That can keep you more separate from the public domain. Have the LLC manage all your money and everything for you, and it technically be as an agent, and technically you can do a ton of things. You can have the trust own everything. Then the PMA, all it does, the church, all it does is offer its, religious services. It doesn't even manage money. So you can do a ton of different. So you set up the business management side. You have everything clear. I even have a CPA taking my class. Have her set up your books. And, you know what I mean? So it's like, dot your I's, cross your T's, take care of business, learn how it works. Take it from this obscure underground thing and do it with respect and reverence to your foundation, and you learn your rights. Learn how to stand up for those rights. Now, if you're challenged on either one of those, you are at risk. you are even at risk serving medicine with no church, and arguably more at risk, right? So my whole argument in this is it not better to set up a church, have a legal standing, like a lawful foundation that you would have a potential leg to stand on in a court of law, than to just be serving psychedelics with no knowledge of what you're doing, no, So because that leg to stand on, in my opinion, is stronger than get a 501c3 and apply for, and we saw that with Soul Quest. Soul Quest, it's a trap, in my opinion, and as we know, like the Controlled Substances Act doesn't even mention religion once. It has no jurisdiction over religion. The DEA has no jurisdiction over religion, period. It has jurisdiction over illegal substances used in a legal setting, but is not entheogenic use under worship. It's been granted by the Supreme Court that's a right. So if you know what you're doing, so my whole point is, if you're serving psychedelics and you have no foundation in place whatsoever, you're more at risk than if you set up something like this. So let me share what it entails to actually get to your question.
Yeah, and actually just let me reiterate that point, because I think it's an important one. Because I do know a lot of people have gone through the process of setting up an entheogenic church. And actually that's how this conversation was initiated. It was one of my supporters over at Patreon wanted to go through this process, and that's how he found you. And I said, oh, that sounds really interesting. I want to talk to her. Can you connect us so that we could have an interview? That's how this came about. But I've known a lot of people who have kind of go through this process, and I've interviewed several people who have been through the process, usually the 501c3 route. And the important thing to recognize is that it's not a guarantee. This is not that you are not going to be arrested, not going to be taken to court, but it provides you with some degree of legitimacy, and it gives you a basis for argument in court.
Yeah.
And then also,
if it's in good faith.
Yes.
Small caveat, it has to be in good faith.
It has to be in good faith. In other words, it's not just, oh yeah, let's form a church so we can take all the drugs we want. Oh, it's got to be, no, this is our sincere religious practice, ceremonial practice. And then also, I think it's important to point out that it can give support and legitimacy within local jurisdictions as well, in the sense that your local municipality might then recognize, okay, well, yeah, this is a church, we're going to leave them alone. So these are methods to provide a level of protection, but again, we want to emphasize it's not a guarantee. And I think Soul Quest is it's just a great example. So that's the Ayahuasca Church of Mother Earth. I think that's their subname in Florida, and that they went through the whole process and they applied to the DEA to get their exemption for ayahuasca, and then they were denied. So they gave up all their information. They gave up, submitted all this materials, and then the government says, well, no.
And made them wait for 3 years also operating in illegal. They made them wait like 3 years operating in a legal gray area.
Yeah.
And it was only when they sued for a motion to force the hand of the DEA did the DEA deny them. So they were just left in limbo.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
And the legal system, it's important to recognize, is not set up for this. Like you say, the Drug Enforcement Agency doesn't have anything to do with religion or churches or religiosity. And even the courts themselves, this is a point that I always like to make. It's like, look, I got my PhD in religious studies. And one of the things that we learn, like right off the bat, is that defining religion is really hard, and that we might not be able to do it. That we can talk about what are the families of religions, but there's not like universal features that we can say defines every single religion. And that really you need an advanced degree to be able to talk about that. And that judges and lawyers, they are not educated in the field of religious studies.
Judges are, by the way, most judges are, but lawyers are not.
Okay. But even there, the judges, they're not necessarily, like in the United States, religion is often defined as a system of belief, for example. That, okay, you've got to have this belief system. But I like to point out someone that I've interviewed here on the podcast a few times is Mike Crowley, and he's Welsh, and he's actually initiated as a Tibetan Buddhist Lama. And he said, well, when people ask me, like, what do Buddhists believe? He said, my answer is as little as possible. So I like to use that as an example that there's lots of religions out there and spiritual communities that don't define themselves by what they believe. They define themselves based on other principles. But in
Mm-hmm.
US law, that's, we even call this is what is your belief system? What is your faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
What
Yep.
doctrines do you adhere to? And it's just not every culture, not every community defines their religiosity under those terms and concepts. So we have kind of
Right.
a very Judeo Christian centric view of what constitutes religion versus what doesn't. Like, and also one of my areas in religious studies was Native American religious practices. And I always like to point out that actually Native Americans had their religious rights denied. This is why we had the Native American Religious Freedom Restoration Act, that their ability to practice their religions was curtailed and denied by the federal government up until recent decades, that
Mm-hmm.
they were not allowed to practice their religion because it didn't
Right.
fit the Judeo-Christian Western definition of what a religion should be. And so it was not recognized as a religion. It was recognized as a cultural practice, but
Right.
not a religion that is worthy of granting protective rights to. So it's a
Absolutely.
mess. It's a mess.
It's a mess. And I mean, there's even like more recently what do they call it? Like the Pan American? No. Dang, I wish I remembered. It's like they've recently awarded religiosity to a church that has no deity, and it's like polytheistic. There's one that has, I wish I could remember the cases. I have a cheat sheet for that for my students, but there's another one, and it was like some kind of let me see if I can. Oh, Washington Ethical Society versus District of Columbia. I have it here. Revolved around whether the petitioner incorporated, so it was an incorporated humanistic church linked with the American Ethical Union, whether it meets the criteria for tax exemption for religiosity as a church. And it did. So it's an ethical society. It's like, and they're talking about, and that's like not even religious. Like they've outruled that there even needs to be a relationship with God for it to be a religion. There is literally no, and what's more, because of the free exercise, no court can define or
Right.
lawmaker can define religion, period. So, so they are barred from ruling whether something is or is not a church, religious, period. They
Yeah.
can rule on whether something is or is not a church to some extent, or sincere religious belief is more technical or more precise, but they cannot make a ruling on whether something is religious or not, and because they can't even define it, as you said. That
Yeah.
was a great sidebar. Yeah, great addition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then getting back to what are the elements then that, for example, that are taught in your class? What are the elements that you need to cultivate and develop within the context of your church in order to claim your natural rights around an entheogenic practice?
Yeah, well, to sort of first continue or like conclude with what I was saying earlier about
Okay.
like the difference, the 501(c)(3) and the
Yeah,
five. So
okay.
these are unincorporated associations, unincorporated religious associations. So there are secular unincorporated associations. That's their historic term. People nowadays call them private membership associations or PMAs, but they're technically more historically called unincorporated associations or private unincorporated churches. Okay. And they are able to be tax exempt under Section 508C1A of the tax code. So, a common misnomer to say, oh, something is or is not a 508C1A, because it's not technically a 508. It's invoking Section 508C1A to be mandatorily accepted from the tax code, which you can pull it up and just if people are curious, they can literally research Section 508C1A and read what it actually says. It says a church is automatically, tax exempt. It does not have to apply to be tax exempt. They've just programmed us or like propagandized that we think we have to. So that's a funny, interesting thing. And I have a link I can share or give you. The IRS government website itself says that churches are not required to be filed to be tax exempt. You can also provide tax deductible donations, but I recommend personally in our lineage of knowledge of this, we do not recommend doing tax deductible donations because it will get you on the IRS radar, which we want to avoid wherever we can, and just not even be public benefit, not even receiving any benefit, period. We don't need you. We don't want you. If people make donation, they make it donation from their heart, and that's it, But the other big piece of it is liability. People talk about like liability aspects, and this is the major drawback regarding if you're a PMA, there's no technical legal personality. Okay, like with a corporation, you create what's called a legal personality. It has a legal identity, a container, an entity, which is called a personality in the law, legal system. Now, if you're a PMA, you are a group of individuals coming together for a common purpose. Okay? And so if somebody causes issue, everybody could be potentially liable. However, every state is different. Every state is different. And there's the Uniform Unincorporated Association Act. And some of them treat them, if those who have adopted the UUNAA around unincorporated associations have certain ways of treating it, but most states are vastly different. Now, what we've seen in most case law, and that I've researched on this and my teachers, is that it's mostly going to boil down to personal liability. Like if you don't fill in a hole and someone's on ayahuasca and you're responsible for that retreat and the landowner is responsible for that retreat and they break their ankle, you're now liable. It's common sense, really, like handling your business. Now, there is the potential for you can get professional liability insurance as a trustee of an unincorporated association. However, nothing will cover the medicine, of course, as we know, no matter what. There are ways to minimize liability, for example, not directly administering, like you put the cup on the altar, they pick up the cup, things like that. There's other aspects to this I won't go into because it's, I offer a course on it, but also it is my teacher's knowledge across many years of development. But essentially, the other aspect of liability protection is putting assets in private trusts. You put assets in private trusts. This is a whole other ballgame of like profound information, like life-changing, critical information. But you put assets in, even the whole church. All of the church assets go in the private trust. This is like the second level of my work that I do. And you put all the assets in the private trust manages all the money and everything. And then the PMA and the church just does what it does. Doesn't even need to manage money. And then you have that private trust own everything. I will also make one other caveat about the church. I'm trying to be comprehensive here because there's so much to understand that, like, if I leave something out, it's like a glaring omission. For example, like these private churches, you're not owning land or any real titled property in the PMA. You can as an individual trustee of the PMA, and it's in your name, but you're putting it as, I am a trustee owner of this. But this is where we recommend either working with the LLC or the private trust, more specifically the private trust structure, because that is a zillion other benefits I won't go into now. It's just like, oh my God, people need to know this information. I just don't even know how to get it to them. But so you work with these other structures. So that's another kind of caveat is like, are you owning real title to property, especially land? Are you owning any kind of like stocks, any kind of securities, right? Publicly traded markets like crypto. That's going to need a specific kind of structure because you're necessarily engaging with public domain statutory entities by definition. You're going to have to give disclosures and give up some of your privacy. So there's caveats, and I just want to like be comprehensive to not mislead people. But yeah, so that was your take. So now I can kind of go into, I want to make sure I answered that aspect of the question. And I was going to go into like, how does it protect the entheogenic use?
Yeah, so, I think we're ready for that. Good.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, Clementine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Keeping track. So, awesome.
Yeah. I'm like pretty cognitively really good. Socially, I'm like, oh, how do I be a human? Okay. So, entheogenic protection. So, the 501c3 works where you declare it your religion and you disclose that that's a part of your religion, right? And then you apply for the CSA exemption, which you're not going to get. Newsflash. Just joking. Very, very few of you will get. And if any. And, but it's protected under the, RFRA and in general, the free exercise of religion. Like you're able to, have rights to your own, religious practice, as we know. Well, the way that the private church works is, okay, the best example and like the easiest way to explain it is like we talk about like, and this is the way my teacher talks about I have two like prominent teachers in this work. So the way that we talk about it is, and we have historical examples of this actually, we're like, okay, a private drinking club in a dry county, like, in Texas, we have some counties you cannot sell alcohol, right? You cannot commercially sell alcohol in that county. Well, so what do people do? They set up private drinking clubs, private social clubs. You go into that, building, you sign their agreement. Suddenly, you're no longer a public citizen. Now you're a private member. You have temporarily changed your status to be under the bylaws, the jurisdiction of their bylaws. You're now a private member under the bylaws of the Private Membership Association. Now, suddenly you can buy alcohol. You could suddenly buy alcohol because you're no longer in the jurisdiction of the public domain or the local municipality jurisdiction. So that's kind of funny, right? Same thing with like cigar clubs. And there was like, these bans on certain cigars. You could do the same thing. So like the easiest way to explain what it is, essentially what you're doing is you're changing your jurisdiction. So what this entails, I forgot we didn't go over that. So what this entails in a nutshell, now it is a lot more complex than this, and because education is key, and I'm very, a lot of people are setting these kind of churches up without any form of education, without any form of talking about, the way that these structure, you could be pierced, your protections can be pierced if you do not know what you're doing. For example, if we have cases of these type of organizations like advertising to the public. Okay. If you advertise like a medical treatment and claim to cure something, boom, you're under the jurisdiction of the government. And you've put yourself there because you didn't know what you were doing. So advertising, acting in a commercial matter, as opposed to staying private. Private language. This is not a fee. This is a donation. You can receive fees as a church. I won't go into that. It's just another like little trail. But you can have business income as a church, but there's certain aspects of things to take care of with that. But that's more tax code stuff anyway. But so aside from this, being in commercial domain, right? Instead of advertising to the public, I'm advertising to my private members, and I'm making sure that every post I make, I'm, hypothetically here is, it's going to say, this is for our private members, inquire within. Your goal as the private church is to grow your membership, grow your congregation. It's not to sell things. So those are just small aspects of how you stay private, right? Yeah. And so what it entails is you set up your foundation with documents, with, they're called bylaws, articles of association. You put in place membership agreements. So when somebody interacts with your medicine, they have already signed a membership agreement, which doubles as a liability waiver, and they've already acknowledged there's a covenant of silence protecting the privacy of this church. If you go out and you break this contract, you are liable to suit. If you want to go and blab about what goes on here, you're liable to the suit. For example, there's things like that, protections in place from the membership agreement. And these agreements have been upheld in court. That attorney I was telling you about earlier has seen a number of these be upheld in court. Of course, I'm working with her. Her and her partner are working on a practice guide. I haven't announced that yet or shared that one. Good at first here, but she's working on, I asked her, because every time I talk about this, I just have to deal with all these debates from attorneys, all these people that don't understand it. And I'm not here to say this is the perfect or best solution for everybody, but it is a damn good solution for all the hundreds and thousands of people that are never going to get the CSA exemption. And it's a viable alternative. And there is going to be a case brought in court soon. And if they know what they're doing and they've, have a tight ship, and they're educated, I guarantee we're going to have some good precedents. We already have precedents for private organizations, the protections being maintained, large landmark cases like in the Supreme Court, where they're saying, an example is NAACP versus Alabama in the 50s, civil rights era. Whole ass state of Alabama is subpoenaing NAACP's membership records, trying to say, hey, I want to see who in my state is. Oh, there's a female cardinal right outside my window right now. But yeah, the state of Alabama is we want to see who's supporting the NAACP in our state because we're the Ku Klux Klan, presumably. It goes just, NAACP at the time is an unincorporated association, PMA, membership, private, and private domain, contract based. And it gets all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, sorry to a whole state.
Yeah.
We cannot let you subpoena the records because why? It is a private domain organization. These protections have been upheld. Now, do they know what they're doing? There's cases like DeRuzo versus State in Texas more recently, and this is a chiropractor. He's in, chiropractor in New York. He leaves his license. He starts a PMA down in Texas offering stem cell treatment to pretty big celebrities, football stars and stuff, and he's a PMA. Okay? He's not saying it's medical. He's not saying it cures. He's just doing what he's doing. He's in the private jurisdiction. Well, he gets arrested, he gets jailed, the news gives a whole smear campaign against him, judge puts him in the slammer. Well, he got exonerated, 5.5 years later, completely exonerated, and now suing every single person, including the judges and the news anchors that smeared him. Because the rights exist. Now, are you prepared to stand up for your rights? That's what this route is for. If you're going to stand up for your rights, if you're going to educate yourself, this is about sovereignty, and this is about knowing what you are allowed to do and standing on that under God, in my words, by God, for God, for the protection of your religious freedoms. And, that's what it requires, unfortunately, in this country. So it's not for the faint of heart, and it's not for somebody that's going to just laze through it. And no, this is for people that care. And this is for people that are going to, step into sovereignty of a tribal nation state, for lack of a better word, step into stewardship of a tribal community and be sovereign and be connected with God and to do it right and to do it thoroughly, right? So back to what it entails, I want to stay on track because we're, to honor time.
Yeah.
Essentially, you set in place the documents, you get your founding documents, you get the membership agreements. Everybody engaging with your medicine signs these membership agreements. They acknowledge it's a religious practice. They acknowledge that it's a covenant of silence. They acknowledge, and there's ways here's how you severance your membership if you'd like. There's a clear everything, they acknowledge that they cannot go to a court of law if they have a dispute. They have to go to the internal tribunals of the community. They agree to private arbitration. If it gets to that, they agree to the internal conflict management system. So you're already agreeing to waive your rights to a public trial. So there's all these protections in place. Once you do that, part of my work, again, is I set up the business side. I set up the bank accounts. I figure out how they want to manage money. I give them several options. And if they want to do the trust, I put them on track to do the trust class next. And just really flesh it out. I have, module on like safeties, on the religious aspects. So the modules are like natural law, divine law, understanding our foundation. Module 2 is like the American legal system, understanding how they would challenge you if they did, the actual like how laws work, what it is. Module 3 is like the private domain, where the contract law, where it comes from, where the powers are from, etc. Module 4 is religious freedom, all the cases, understanding the history of this, why this is very well documented. You have rights. Module 5 is the tax code, as well as like kind of like your management structure. Module 6 is all about their documents, understanding what they are. We go through them like paragraph by paragraph in that module. Module 7 is like, the safety, sacraments, and culture, I call it. And module 8 is ongoing maintenance and contingencies, where I talk about like, okay, if someone knocks on your door, what do you do? Someone, it's all like kind of like the actual like applied, what you do, how you navigate, etc. The IRS comes, what do you do? Blah, 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 blah. How to stay in the private domain, how to not advertise, what language to use, etc. So that's kind of what I do. And there's a ton of supplemental resources, including like how to set up a conflict management system. And it's all the shit I wish I had.
Yeah.
Lord help me when I started that I've earned in the trenches, and I've put it together. And it's a really amazing system. Even for people that don't go this route for church, it's an amazing educational system itself.
Yeah, I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Clementine, this has really been quite the educational conversation. And this is just a whole different approach that I have, up until today, have been largely ignorant of. So I appreciate you taking the time to share this with me and with the listening audience. I want to remind them that your website is The Mind of Clementine. It's literally themindofclementine.com, all
Mhm.
one word. And for anybody who's listening is like, yeah, I'm interested in establishing a theogenic church and maybe I want to go this other route, that you have these classes available. You also have access where just set up an introductory call with people. So I think you're very accessible. And it just sounds like a really fascinating, very different approach. I'm so glad that we were able to have this conversation and bring this information onto the Entheogenic Evolution podcast, especially because I have had, as I mentioned, lawyers previously talking about the 501c3 route, the exemption route, and this is
Mhm.
just a very fascinating, very, very different route in a different area of legal precedent and legal tradition. And so thank you very much for the time and for the education today, Clementine. This has been awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, honored and like I said, love the full circle aspects and I love it. I could talk about this all day. It's with autistic special interest. It's like we like get nourished by sharing about the
Yeah.
like the obscure interests that we like spend eons researching into late into the night that no one would ever research, you know. So it's a joy for me to talk about it. It's an utter like honor, like beyond my life, beyond everything I ever am like as a person. It's like my purpose. It's by God, for God. It comes through me. I'm utterly honored to be in service to this in every way. I'm in awe that my life has put me through all of this to be able to do this. And yeah, I truly feel like it's what God guided me to do. And so yeah, everybody I get to share it with, I'm so grateful. It's really just a huge honor. And yeah, I'm actually the way that my process works is I give a master class every so often. I haven't done one for a while because I've been doing the trust class production, which is like, oh my God, crazy process, but intense, like beautiful, deep, creational contribution work. And but yeah, so the last one I gave was in December, but I basically have where a link where you can sign up for it, and then you just get the replay. And I like, even if people don't work with me at all or just have interest in this realm in general, that is an amazing place to start. I have a whole PowerPoint, visuals, and it really like explains it in a way that whether or not people even want to go this route, it's an amazing resource to just get a foundation in place about the private domain and the church and how it works. So I have them start there, and then if they are interested, we do an intro call for people to work with to explore signing up. So, and then yeah, the private trust. Maybe we could do another one on that. I think that's a really important aspect of protecting your work as a
Mm.
facilitator, and that is in itself like profound knowledge, like just life changing, like legacy. It will outlive you kind of knowledge, you know. Like most people don't think about what they're going to leave behind and how it, you know, they'll give a lot of their estate to taxed to the state, and instead you can perfectly just give it through a private trust quietly, and nobody be the wiser. It's not
Oh,
their business. So yeah, it's really profound, the private domain, and thank you for the honor of sharing my passion with you and with your listeners. And yeah, I appreciate everybody who stuck around this long. It's been kind
all
of a long
right.
time. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Clementine. Really
Yeah.
appreciate it. And definitely let's stay in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for, yeah, spreading the word and being such a pillar for such a long time. I know what it takes to hold something for so long, and just thank you for your service and for, yeah, sharing the word of others too. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Clementine.